Hey there, folks. Thanks for joining me this evening. We've got about 5 more minutes before I'm going to start digging into the meat and potatoes. But I've got a list of questions from some of my Patreon supporters. But if you have individual questions that you want me to address, just go ahead and type them into that sidebar there on the chat. And I will try and get everybody's questions addressed this evening. I've got some topics I want to cover anyways, and hopefully be able to fill out and get all the information that you guys would like to know about kokanee across America, or just general questions about kokanee fishing in general. So I'm happy to answer any of those questions as we get going here. And howdy, Vance. Thanks for joining us. And Northwest Open Season. Good to see you guys here too. Yeah, while we're waiting, this is actually the time of year that there's 2 times a year I do jigging for kokanee, and it is in the early summer, late spring, when they're just starting to form dense schools and they're near the surface. And then I also like to do it this time of year because they tend to coalesce and come together in really tight, aggressive schools as they sort of get ready to spawn. Now, if they've started to shift heavy towards that, red coloration, it's probably past the time that I usually target them. But there's sort of this like 2 to 3 week window in most lakes where they're still really good meat quality, but sort of having those pre-spawn behaviors. So hopefully I'll be able to get out and do some kokanee jigging soon, because I'm starting to see on some of my lakes, they're, instead of going from scattered fish, they're starting to tighten up into schools again. I definitely saw that when I was in Connecticut. All the pre-spawn fish were on the north end of the lake, right on the drop off, just massive schools, and that's where the larger fish were. So if I would have had jigs, I probably could have slayed them there, but I didn't bring any with me. But yeah, be sure and put those questions over there on the chat if you want me to get to them, and I will. And yeah, we'll start digging into it in just a few minutes. Still got people joining in, and I want to make sure that I give everybody some time and not jump ahead of schedule. I do just want to take a quick moment while everybody's jumping on here to say how much I appreciate everybody's support on this. Just the feedback from the viewers has been really exciting. And even when I was out on the lakes, I was running into all of you all the time, and it was great. You guys had a lot of great and supportive things to say, and some of you reached out and gave tips on some of these lakes too that were new to me, and I really appreciate that. And then also to the companies that made this possible. That's Old Town Canoe and Kayak, Paulina Peak Tackle, Hummingbird, Cannon Downriggers, Procure, and Ram Mounts. So a great host of companies there that I've been super happy to have their support. And then all of your guys' support through Patreon, community members. I've had lots of people donating through super thanks on the bottom of the videos and stuff, and also just buying through my links. It's been great. It really made this possible, especially in a year where gas prices were not cheap. So yeah. I see we're getting some more questions there, and I see George is there. It's good to see you, George. Hopefully it's a little cooler down in Central California than it is up here right now. And Brian from Colorado. Good to see you guys. Scott. Northwest Open Season asked if I have ever tried hover fishing from my kayak. I've done it in my autopilot. I have not done it in the pedal drives. I imagine that it's a little bit more challenging. I'm hoping to actually hit, I see Hack of All Trades on there. Next week, I've got some stuff with my wife. She's been going through a lot of health issues this past year. So we're actually headed over for a long series of doctor's visits and surgeries over the next month. So I'm hoping to squeeze in some Western Washington fishing, including an end of season trip to Baker Lake for some sockeye if she's filling up to it. So, but yeah, that's been one of the great things about this. The success of this channel has been I've been able to have some flexibility in my schedule to be there for Sidra during this tough time for her. So it's our healthcare system's just a mess coming out of the COVID pandemic. So, Vance, thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate that. Next year, I'm looking at doing Canada. It'll probably be more late season because their lakes tend to peak a lot later than ours. So late July, August seems to be peak time for them, except for some of their lower elevation lakes closer to the border. So I might target those in June. I'm just working out. I have to work out the proper visas for filming in Canada. As a content creator, it's kind of a gray area. I think I'm getting everything sorted out, and once I get those approved, then I'll start working towards generating an itinerary of lakes and hopefully doing a little bit of fundraising for that as well. Steve, hello, early bird. It's good to see you there. All right, so we're just past 7. So I'm just going to talk briefly about all of the different lakes I've visited and sort of my reflections on those lakes. But if you guys have any questions, just hit me up over here on the right and I'll try and get to them in the chat. So the season started out actually pretty early for me on what I consider my home trophy Kokanee Lake, and that is Lake Roosevelt. Lake Roosevelt was very challenging this year. I always considered Lake Roosevelt to be one of the more challenging lakes out there. Mostly because unlike a lot of the trophy lakes I visited this year, there you're sorting through smaller fish trying to find larger fish. Whereas Roosevelt, there just seems to be a paucity of fish. So there are many times you can just troll all day and get nothing or just one fish or one bite. There's not a lot of little fish. And this year it was very wet. It was very cold. So we had a lot of water flow in Roosevelt, which always makes for really tough fishing in that lake because a lot of those fish will entrain over the dam. When we have high flows like this, they'll just move right on out of the reservoir and leave. And so it was a very challenging start. I found some 17 and 18-inch fish, but never really any of the big giants. And I spent many, many days out there looking for the big ones, but never did come across them. Then there was sort of a break where I didn't target anything. Roosevelt's a very strange lake in that it tends to peak early in the season. So it's kind of fun because there's not a lot of kokanee action, but sometimes the best fishing on Roosevelt is, sort of that January to April bracket is the best time when they're starting to pull down the reservoir and those fish all get concentrated. There's not a lot of them. They get concentrated from Keller's Ferry downstream. And so that's why it's kind of a fun fishery in that there's really not many other kokanee games in town at that time. Then after there, I went to Anderson Ranch. And Anderson Ranch was sort of one of the surprises of the trip. There was a lot of negative reviews recently of the fishery at Anderson Ranch because in years past, you could go up there and catch 20 fish that were, 17, 18 inches or greater without much work. So there's a lot of people sort of saying, well, that fishery is over. It's been overpressured or they've had problems with the population declining because of either overpressure or fires and things like that. And so when I went there, the water was extremely low. I ended up driving on the lake bed quite a ways up the lake to launch. And it took me a while to find them. But once I found them, and they were in traditional hotspots where there's this area where the big power lines come across, and they were right underneath there like they had been in past years. It was a very hot bite, and I caught a lot of fish. I think if I would have had more time before the winds came up, I think I probably could have got close to a very generous limit. But it was an amazing experience. From there, I went to Northern California. Originally, I intended on going to Berryessa, but Berryessa has been sort of off its bite lately. It's been a very cyclical lake. The king salmon bite's been pretty good there. There was another lake I really wanted to go to, which was Shaver Lake in Southern California, but it was just too far and the gas prices were just crazy. So Whiskey Town is where I went to. It's been a very consistent and productive fishery. It's a very beautiful, just outside the town of Redding. Had an absolute amazing evening there. I knocked out a limit in no time, basically less than 100 yards from the boat ramp. So if you're in Northern California, I definitely recommend Whiskey Town. I tried nearby Shasta, which is just starting to try and get their kokanee fishery going again, which is very strange because the lake's at a very low level. Um, and I did not have any luck. But the folks that are finding kokanee in that lake, they're large, which is pretty typical when they're trying to get a new kokanee population established. So from there, I went to Wallowa, and oh, actually, in between, I had really wanted to do Wickiup, but Wickiup's gone. um, Combination of drought and over allocation of water in that reservoir on the Deschutes River for irrigation and endangered species has been a death knell for that lake. And the kokanee are gone. It's basically just dries up every year. Um, but I always heard rumors about large kokanee at nearby Crane Prairie, and Crane Prairie is a lot like Willow. It's this big, shallow bowl. There's very diffuse channels, river channels out there that maybe are 15 feet deep. But I found just following those old river channels, trolling, flatlining, I found some really big kokanee. I got broke off twice, which is crazy. Brand new 10-pound leaders getting snapped by those fish. So that was really exciting, and a fishery I'd like to explore some more, because I imagine fish that are 17, 18 inches in May are probably pretty significant by the time they hit, July and August in terms of size. And then from there, I went to Wallowa Lake, and I'd seen pictures of just massive 5 to 6 pound fish coming out of that lake. And I spent a lot of time on the water there, days and days and days. It's like 25 fish limit, so you can just keep catching and catching and releasing and catching. And there's just so many kokanee in that lake, but most of them are like that. You get the occasional one that's 16, 17 inches. But I never was able to find some of the giants that I was hearing about. But one of my favorite lakes for just in terms of natural beauty, and just you're kept busy all the time. There's plenty of fish to catch, so it's a fun place to go. From there, I returned home, took a little bit of a 2 week breather, and then I took off on my big trek. Originally, I'd planned on fishing in New Mexico. So I was going to do Flaming Gorge, Strawberry, Blue Mesa, and Navajo in northeast or northwest New Mexico. I scratched New Mexico because it was further away and more expensive to drive to. And then I decided to add Fontenelle, because I'd heard rumors about Fontenelle Reservoir in Wyoming, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And when I got there, I had some loose reports from some of the biologists that said that basically the center of the lake is the best place to target, and I should just troll right down the middle towards the dam. And I got there; it was so dirty. There was a ton of dirty water. I was really worried about it, but the locals said that that's normal. And I was flatlining, and then like my first fish was 19. The next fish was like 21. I mean, it was just big fish after big fish after big fish. I only had one day there. I wish I had spent more days there, because after that I went to Flaming Gorge, which, like Roosevelt, is having a high water flow year. They're also dumping extraordinarily large amounts of water for the first time, trying to send water down to save Lake Powell and Lake Mead, which is probably a waste. But they were dumping a ton of water, trying to send it to the desert Southwest. So it really threw off the fishery a little bit. It was very late. Water temperatures were running way behind where they normally would be at the end of June. And so the bigger fish were harder to come by. The bite was less consistent. I had a relatively poor day in the kayak. I mean, I still caught lots of fish, but none of the giants. And then I moved up lake and fished with Richie Height. The first day we did really well. We got a couple fish in the high teens and some of the low 20s. And the next day we really struggled to find many. I think we did get one big one, and it was very challenging. And Richie's very deeply experienced on that lake. He ended up winning the Derby the day after I left, and his feeling that the lake was just behind schedule. And they went back a month later, and they did much better with much larger grade of fish. So I think that's just what happened. I just mistimed my visit. Traditionally, the last week of June is usually one of the best times to visit Flaming Gorge. This year, it was more July. So I'm going to go back because I need redemption. I need to go back to that lake on my kayak and catch some giants. I just can't. I just can't deal with it. I just, I've for many years I wanted to go there, and I felt like I missed it. So I want to go back and do better. From there, I went to Blue Mesa, which, despite being extremely low, again because it's being drawn down to feed the desert Southwest, and because of drought, I still found really consistent kokanee bite there. Very early morning bite, which is typical. It was really hot when I was there. The hottest, one of the highest elevation stops on the entire tour. It's also the hottest stop. But good looking kokanee. Really fun to be back on my original kokanee lake where I used to catch kokanee when I was in college. And then on the way back, I hit Strawberry, which I took me a while to dial in that lake. I only had 2 days, and the wind there is crazy, and it was a big struggle to spend much time on the water before I got blown off each day. But I got consistently caught limits or near limits, and I lost some big fish, especially on the second day. And I'd been on the road a long time, and I was ready to get home to see Sidra because it's hard for her being on her own for months at a time. And I decided to bolt one day early, and then instead, on the way home, I stopped at Payette in central Idaho, entirely on rumored reports of large kokanee, and they turned out to be entirely true. And there was almost nobody fishing that lake when I was there. It was amazing, and it's really cool to see that kokanee fishery coming back. And then I was home for a month, and then went to Connecticut. The really cool thing about Connecticut is I felt really out of my comfort zone in that it's not traditional kokanee water. It's one of the longest running kokanee hatchery programs in the United States. It's hard to believe. And there's very little reports on that lake. It doesn't get much pressure because the lake has horsepower restrictions. So it's not a lake you can take big boats on. It's not a big lake either. And it was a really cool experience. When I first got there, I met a couple of old timer kokanee guys, Joe and Mike, who had been kokanee fishing since the 1950s in Connecticut. And one of their dads actually used to own a marina on one of the kokanee lakes. And they were showing me, like, when they first introduced kokanee to those lakes, they were catching 20-inch kokanee, going out in wooden rowboats at night and using lanterns to draw fish in underneath and still fishing for them. So really cool experience to talk to those guys. I mean, I can't imagine kokanee fishing for 50 years in Connecticut, but those guys have been doing it, and they were still out there twice in the 3 days I was there. So they clearly love it and are passionate about it. And I can respect that and empathize with that. So that's awesome. So that rounded out the whole tour. I caught kokanee from coast to coast, and a lot of kokanee. So it was a really fun experience. So let's jump into some of the questions here as we go down, and then I'll bring up some other details too. Let's see here. So one of the questions here is from Rich. It asks, it looks like you only use a few different color dodgers. Some say use many different colors. Do color blades on the dodger blade colors matter? I definitely have my confidence colors, and it's really interesting how they varied between me and other experienced kokanee anglers I go with. But in general, the silver moon jellies are always really productive for me. And anything with chartreuse, to be honest, one of the best producing kokanee dodgers this entire series was the Paulina Peak, the purple haze. So that's purple and chartreuse. I don't know if I have it with me. Let me see here. It might be on my rig out my garage. Oh, here it is. I got it. So it's this one right here. Was one of my top producers on every lake. In fact, there were several lakes that this was the only dodger that would get bit, and it didn't matter what lure I put behind it. So that was definitely my top dodger overall. This is the light version, so it moves pretty aggressively side to side. And then the other one that was another top producer for me was in the mornings before the sun came up. This Glow Wonder Bread was a really good one for me. And finally, my confidence dodger for every lake is just the simple Moon Jelly Silver. It just seems to work in low light and direct sunlight to cloudy days. And every day it seems to be a productive one for me. I switch out all the time. But just oddly enough, those three tended to be the ones that produced the most. The only exception to that was in Connecticut. They were not responding to those colors at all. And I doubt many of you are going to go to Connecticut to fish for kokanee, but that combination was this gold chartreuse, gold base, chartreuse and orange crinkle tape, and then the red micro hoochie with the glow head. They just couldn't stay off of that for some reason there. I have some general rules. Generally, when it's cloudy, or low light, I'm gonna hang to those silvers and glow colors. And when that sun comes out, it's a very direct sunlight. I'm going to switch to the gold. I've tried copper with not very much success, but gold does seem to do it, or 50-50, gold and nickel or silver. Vance is asking, he's headed to Wallowa this weekend. I've heard that the fish, the big ones, are down on the south end, schooling up, getting ready to run up to spawn. So they're getting pretty dark already, but there's plenty of next year's fish to target. You'll find those fish more on the north end if you're trolling. But if you want to target some of the 5 and 6 pounders, there's some big ones down the south end that are worth looking at. Let's see. Northwest Open Season asks, what's my thought on spinner versus wobbler versus plain hoochie for kokanee? That's a really good question. So when I go out, I am carrying usually 3 different boards. I'll have my micro hoochie board, sort of my spinner board, and then I'll have the various wobbler style lures, right? And to be honest, on this entire trip, the plain micro hoochies way outperformed everything else, especially the pink purple. Pink purple was my go-to hoochie on a lot of lakes. The pink purple did amazing at Strawberry, at Blue Mesa. It did pretty solid for me at Flaming Gorge. It just seemed to be the best producing hoochie on this trip. And I ran a lot of orange and a lot of plain pink. I would always reach for that thing, and I'd throw it down there and it would get hit right away. And a lot of times it would, produce 4 out of 5 fish on some of these lakes. So it was a confidence lure. In fact, I'm almost completely out because I got so many of them got just so deeply shredded by getting hammered by fish after fish after fish after fish. So that was a good one. I did actually do well on spinners on some of these lakes. The best spinner was this one here, which is a chartreuse and orange beads with a moon jelly blade. I don't know what it is about this spinner, but it seemed to be like when everything else sort of turned off, that, after mid-morning and it was hard to buy a bite, I could always squeeze out a few fish off of this one. I don't know what it was about it. I would run like other pink spinners and hoochie spinners, in traditional kokanee colors, and this one was always a better performer for me. The only time that I did extremely well with the platinum flutterbugs was on Richie's boat. He was running this gold and moon jelly one, and it caught a lot of big fish on the first day I fished with him. On the second day, it hardly ever got touched. It was just the micro hoochies were actually catching fish, and that was primarily either plain pink or this gold one, golden ticket right there. Okay, let's see here. So Doug asks a little bit about fishing Coeur d'Alene, Hayden Lake. I fished both of those when I lived in Hope, Idaho several years ago. Coeur d'Alene had small kokanee at the time, and it cycled up just after I left. I think now it's cycled back down to smaller fish. But Hayden kind of reminds me of Merwin in a lot of ways, and that's a very consistent kokanee fishery for fishing that 13 to 15-inch bracket with the occasional large one. Hayden's one of my favorite kokanee lakes in North Idaho. Let's see. I didn't get a chance to go to the Four Corners and fish McPhee. So, Dog in Zoe, he asks, I live in Utah. What was your favorite lake to fish here? I didn't like the one on Strawberry. It was true. Strawberry was, I'll say, I have a list of different lakes here, so I think I'll go through those real quick. But Strawberry was, I think, the most beautiful lake I fished. It was very green. It was a very wet year there, but it's just surrounded by the most gorgeous, like forested and sagebrush landscape. It's a massive body of water. And because of that, it's relatively open. There's a lot of wind problems. And for people in small craft like me, it was rough. So I really had to choose my launches carefully. There was another lake I didn't get to go to, and that is Fish Lake. I only heard about Fish Lake sort of after I'd already set everything in stone in terms of my travel plans. I wish I would have gone there. Fish Lake's another really massive lake in central Utah. But it was producing very large fish, upwards of 4 or 5 pounds too. So, yeah, maybe in the future I'll get a chance to go back down there and fish it again. But I actually enjoyed Strawberry a lot. Flaming Gorge was a little more challenging. I think the Utah area isn't as well known for producing large fish. I mean, they get relatively large fish, 17 and 19 inches down on the Utah side of Flaming Gorge. But if you want the big 20s, you got to go up north. Let's see. Somebody asked, noticed I'm not using Lamb-O-Bass kokanee rods anymore. Any reason for that? And what rods am I using now? So Derek, yeah, I'm not using Lamb-O-Bass for a couple reasons. One is that I dropped one overboard on my kokanee when I was kayak fishing years ago. But another reason is Lamb-O-Bass primarily makes just fiberglass glass rods. That's what their forte is. And those are great action rods, especially for downrigger fishing and for long lining. But I do a lot of dropper weights, and I found that the composite rods are better. And that's why I've tended to move away from glass rods, even Sandy M rods. I tend not to use as much just because the Paulina Peak rods, they're a composite rod. They can handle long lining downriggers, and they can handle like upwards of 5 ounces. So I can use them on Lake Chelan targeting fish at 80 feet. And they've done really well for me. They also make them shorter than a lot of the other kokanee manufacturers. They have like a 7'3" rod, which is perfect for me. 2-piece, very easy to travel with and store. Aaron asks about how was it fishing on borrowed kayaks in Connecticut. Actually, it was very interesting because the person that I borrowed those kayaks from is a follower of my channel and a Patreon. And they had basically modeled their autopilot directly after mine. So there was very little adjustment I had to make there. The same downrigger on the same positioning with the V-lock is very convenient. And then because of gear track systems, I was able to use all the same gear track gear and basically customize the boats in minutes to replicate almost exactly what I do at home. So that was actually really easy. Mike asks about hook size on how did I adjust hook size based on the size of the fish I was targeting at a given lake. That's a good question. So when I go out on these trips, I have about 7 or 8 of these leaderboards tied up. And most of them I have tied up for big fish, but I do have a couple boards for small fish. And for my bigger fish, I'm going to run size 1s or 2s. And then if I'm going to go to lakes where I'm targeting really small fish, like, fish that are, say, 12 inches and smaller, I'm going to drop down to 4s. Now, when I went to Connecticut, I wasn't sure what size fish I had, so I tend to favor larger size hooks just because of that little bit wider gap in the way that these fish slash at the bait. And I think I lost a few more fish in Connecticut because of the larger hook size. So in general, I think 2 is like the optimal, like middle of the road. But like when I'm fishing like Roosevelt, I'm gonna go up to size 1, and if I'm gonna fish my smaller Kokanee lakes, I'm gonna drop down to size 4s. Let's see here. So Peter's asking about how I got my kayaks to Connecticut, so I ended up just borrowing those. Nick asks, "Do I bend the Dodgers?" And I don't. So Paulina Peak sends their Dodgers pre-bent, especially the teardrops, but sometimes I will bend them back. So he puts a very aggressive bend in them so that they wobble really hard at typical Kokanee troll speeds. But there are some days those Kokanee did not want slow. They wanted 1.7 or 1.8 even. And at those speeds, these start to go all the way around. So that's when I will manually flatten them out a little bit so that they can wobble that correct. And then you just kind of have to work them back to where they originally were. So that's something to take into account. The peak performer Dodgers, they can do 1.7 just fine. And if I want to go faster than that, which I rarely do, I can use the heavies on these. The lights will start to turn over at around 1.7, 1.8. If you want to go a little bit faster, if you're doing trout or something, or you're Kokanee, you're super aggressive, then you can use the heavies. Okay, let's see here. Before I jump into more questions here, I was going to go over some of my other things. So my favorite location overall was Fontenelle. I just loved it for the size of the Kokanee and the remoteness. It's one of those hidden gems, and if you're willing to make the drive, you will be rewarded. The most interesting lake to me was Connecticut, just because of the paucity of information online. I couldn't find any reports in like the last 10 years. In fact, there was just one relatively recent video from their Department of Environment and Energy where they were out for like 5 minutes trolling, and he showed a cooler with a couple okay sized Kokanee in it. And that was it. That's all I had to go on. So I was really amazed when I got there. I didn't know if they were rare or hard to catch. And the fish finder was just like lit up with Kokanee. I was like, maybe those are all trout. But as soon as I got down there, I started hooking Kokanee. So that was really cool. Let's see. Most challenging, Lake Roosevelt, hands down. I mean, in terms of number of hours per fish, it's a giant body of water with very few fish. They don't stock it with Kokanee. It's all natural production. They're not even entirely sure where the origins of all those Kokanee are. So it's a very tough lake. Okay, let's jump into some more questions here. Yeah, so Les, I talked a little bit about why Flaming Gorge was a bit of a struggle. There's a lot of factors going on this year, just with a lot of water flow. I think those fish aren't accustomed to that, and water temps are running cooler. So I'm curious to see what next year looks like. Hopefully, I know that they're still in the process of negotiating what's going to happen with Colorado River water. And that's still up in the air. Hopefully, they're not going to take too much more from Flaming Gorge, because there's going to be quite a bit of a political fight between the states, and it's really going to impact Kokanee anglers, because you look at all of these really important Kokanee lakes all on the Colorado River drainage. So that includes Fontenelle, Flaming Gorge, Blue Mesa, Navajo. Those are really big, important Kokanee lakes, and everybody's fighting over water, so it's going to be something to see. The occasional outdoorsman asks any big issues with setting up multiple fishing licenses. Nope, just lots of money. It's surprising what states are the most expensive. Like Wyoming was definitely the most. And a lot of those states, the reason they were expensive is because of all the conservation fees, invasive species fees, and stickers I had to have all the time. One of the nice things about being a kayak is that I oftentimes didn't have to get inspections done for invasive species, because I'm in a kayak. If I had a powerboat, it would have been a lot more complicated procedure on a lot of these lakes, especially like in Connecticut, where there was horsepower restrictions and things like that. Aaron says Detroit lake's been fishing really well. Yeah, Detroit is like, to me, like, Merwin's kind of in a dark chapter, and it's existence right now, but I think Detroit's hitting its stride. I'm seeing some really beautiful 15, 16-inch fish coming out of there. So Hack of All Trades asks, what did I do with all the fish I caught during my trip? This was the most challenging aspect of this entire journey, was transporting fish, preserving fish, and not violating possession limits. Because most states aren't going to differentiate whether you caught it in one state or not, right? 'Cause you could always just claim that you're another state. And a lot of states, even in processed form, didn't allow that. And like in Utah on Strawberry Lake, you're not even allowed to fillet your fish at the lake. So this was a big challenge for me. I was fortunate in that I had a host in Utah who was really happy to put some kokanee in his freezer. And then along the way, I met lots of people who uh, were having bad days on the water or were helping other people who were having bad days on the water, and it cost them time on the water. They just didn't have success, and they have limited time. And a lot of people fish. I understand a lot of people fish, just for the experience, and other people fish because they want it. They need to put meat in their freezer. I know that growing up, um, our house caught on fire and burned to the ground, and the kitchen and everything. And I got rescued by firefighters. Got pulled out of the basement. I was a little kid, but I distinctly remember that, and it set our family back. And we had to live and move in with my grandparents and everything. And there was a time that me and my dad went to the county lake every weekend for crappie and catfish, not because we loved fishing, which we loved fishing, but we were putting meat on the table. And I know that that's important for a lot of people, especially retirees and stuff that are on limited budget. So if I ran into people like that, I would donate my catch to them all along the way. I also had a couple guys rescue some paddleboarders who got caught in a thunderstorm on Blue Mesa, and they had to cut their fishing day short. So I donated a lot of my catch to them too, and they were very, very happy to have that kokanee. So that's what I did with a lot of my stuff. Let's see. So Scott asked, what in my opinion is a big kokanee? I consider anything above 17 big, and I consider anything above 20 a trophy. So that's sort of my limit right in there. So I have a lot of lakes in Okanagan that have big kokanee. There's a lot of lakes here that will consistently produce fish in the 17 to 20 inch class, but very few produce greater than 20. I don't have any information on Subtle Lake in Oregon. I haven't fished it. But it sounds like Adam was doing pretty good there. The Naughty Hooker asks about if I've considered doing any collaborations with other YouTube creators. I've had it's kind of hard to collaborate when you're in a kayak. I would like to do that with other channels where there are guys that don't have experience in kayaks. So kokanee would be fun to get them out and try and get them on their first kokanee and kayak. I think that would be something I'm looking forward to doing. Everything got kind of put on hold with COVID. People didn't really want to interact that much, which is understandable. Me included, because I almost died from pneumonia a few years ago. So I'm very intimately familiar with what it feels like to have your respiratory system failing, and I didn't want to have it happen again. So Fisherman Adventure asks, did I use the same scents in Utah as I do in the Pacific Northwest? So for my scent, I actually brought them all in here. I use the ProCure water soluble stuff. So for my base scents, every time, it doesn't matter what season, I'm going to use krill and right there. And I'm going to use the shrimp oil is the one I use the most of. And then I always top it off. If water temps are warm, let's say like in 70s at the surface, I'm going to go with garlic and bloody tuna. If it's early season and they're cold, I'm just going to use anise and the krill and shrimp. So that's pretty much all I use. But for some reason, late season, the garlic bloody tuna does better. Let's see here. Squim Fish Brothers asked, am I retired from my motorized kayaks now? The answer is yes. I decided to do that because I got a little pudgy I got the autopilot 15, I call it. And I just wasn't feeling the healthiest. So I decided to focus back on the pedal drives, back on lighter kayaks. Um, it's also a lot easier to load because my wife, when she's feeling up to it, we've been going out and she loves to have her own kayak and do her own thing and fish her own way. And it's really hard to load the autopilot and a salty at the end of the day. Two salties is a lot easier on the back. So yeah, I'm out of the motorized game for the time being. I'm still looking to explore options to motorize a kayak, but motorize a less heavy kayak, especially for Sidra, because after she comes off of her surgeries this fall, she's probably not going to be able to pedal for a while. So we're looking at maybe doing installing a Bixby on the back of one of the salties as a way to get her out in the water, and she can still spend time out there without fatiguing. Let's see. What else do we got here? Yeah, somebody's commenting. I definitely made some people's days gifting those Cokes. Yeah, it was really. It's always so much fun to see people's faces light up, especially people who don't have. There's a lot of people fishing these lakes who are just catching trout because they're trolling too fast, too shallow, and for them, kokanee is a one-off catch, and so you give them a big bag of kokanee, they're pretty stoked about it. Let's see. Any tips for kokanee info at Timothy Lake in Oregon? So I know I have fished Timothy kokanee. They tend to run fairly small there. So smaller presentations are going to do better. So use those micro hoochies, especially, and run those size 4 hooks. And I think you'll probably have a little bit better. I've also noticed Timothy runs really cold. It's a very cold, deep lake and clear. So, those smaller sized baits and a little bit longer leaders, I think might help you there. So instead of running 6 to 8 inches like I do, maybe push it out 10 to 12. I've noticed on some of those really deep, cold lakes, those longer leaders can really kick out more fish for you. Let's see. Yes, how far east of the Mississippi would I travel? Or how far east would I travel for kokanee? I went to Connecticut, so that's pretty much as far east as I can go for kokanee. They are trying to reestablish populations in North Carolina. North Carolina used to be producing 4-pound kokanee at Nantahala Reservoir, but it's a good story about invasive species. Somebody introduced a competitive freshwater herring there that called blueback herring that has outcompeted. It's a filter feeder, just like kokanee, and it pretty much caused that fishery to collapse. So that's a good example of that happening. Derek asked if I've ever fished Lake Stevens. I've never fished Lake Stevens. I really want to do a Puget Sound kokanee tour at some point and visit all those. There's a number of really good kokanee lakes in the greater Puget Sound area that I need to target. Let's see. Yeah, somebody else, Glenn's asking about if I've ever will do some lesser known fisheries for New Mexico or Arizona. I did some research. I couldn't find any kokanee fisheries in Arizona. Maybe they have some that I overlooked, but New Mexico has a couple. Hopefully I'll be able to get down there at some point. I love that Four Corners area since that's where I went to college down that way. So hopefully at some point I'll get down there. Right now I'm really going to focus on BC next year. I'm potentially looking at, I actually have several subscribers from Japan, and kokanee fishing is very, very popular in Japan. And the exchange rate to Japan is very good right now. So, and they've just reopened to tourism. So I'm maybe thinking about going over there and doing some fishing for kokanee in Japan. They actually have a different subspecies of kokanee there called black kokanee. And that's just because during their spawning, they don't turn red, they turn jet black. And it'd be really cool to catch some of those. Let's see here. What is the clip weight size to depth ratio? So the snap weights that I use, I have a general rule. So if I'm going to be targeting fish, in 10 to 15 feet, I'm going to use 1 ounce. If they're somewhere in that 20 to 30 foot zone, then I'm going to use 2 ounces, and so on and so forth. So it's a range, right? So this time of year, almost all my fish are on the thermocline in the 30 to 40 foot range. I'm almost always running 3 or 4 ounces. So if I'm running 3 ounces, I'll push it down there at about 100 feet back, 80 feet back. If they're deeper than that, then I'll use a 4 ounce to get down to them. Northwest Open Season asks, do I ever get burned out filming trips to make content, and advice on YouTubers who do get burned out? That is really tough. So I love fishing. So I would do it anyways if I didn't have a camera on me. But setting up the cameras and then so I always tell everybody, for every hour that I'm on the water, there's 2 hours in the editing room. Because I'm often running multiple cameras. It just takes that long to download, back up my files so I don't lose all that hard-earned work, recharging all the batteries, and cleaning out the flashcards for the next day, and then also just managing incredible quantities of data. So when I came back from the tour to Fontenelle, Blue Mesa in Utah, back up to Idaho, I had somewhere around 4.5 terabytes worth of video to go through. So it's just time consuming to back it all up. I always double it up, right? So I have the original file plus a copy, because it's a lot of investment in time and money to capture that. So it does get tedious. I think one of the reasons I haven't got burned out is that I still make videos that I know aren't necessarily going to be the most popular, but I make them because it's something that I enjoy, a topic I enjoy. You'll see that a lot with my small stream fishing. It's not my most popular stuff, but I still love it and I love sharing it. But I think the main reason I don't burn out is because I get so much positive feedback. It's just very inspirational. Every day I get an email or a text or a DM or PM from somebody saying, I watched your video, I went out, I got my first limit, and they're just so stoked about that. And I'm like, man, I can't stop now. There's so much more information I got to share. And every day there's dozens of new questions that are great topics for videos that I need to do. So it's like I have this, it's like the more I produce, the more I inspire people, the more questions they have, the more I'm like, oh, I really should test that, or I haven't really discussed that topic and I need to. And there's just not enough time in the world to be out on the water every day and then take care of my responsibilities here and my other side jobs and stuff. So yeah, I'm sometimes I'm exhausted by it, but I feel like I'm not burning out. So I think that's my advice, is just to, cover the topics that you love, and it makes it easier to keep doing it. And if you do get to the point where you do feel like you're going to burn out, there are days that I'll have everything ready. I'll get out and I'm like, I'm leaving the cameras in the car. I'm just fishing for myself today. Those are really fun days too. I don't know of any really good kayak guides in the Northwest. It's a big gap here. Unfortunately, I think part of the problem is the costs to becoming a guide in Northwest are really expensive compared to other parts of the country. I met several kayak canoe guides in Maine, from Maine, when I was traveling, and it's only $50 for them to get their guide license. And for me here, if I was going to do food fish and game fish, several $100s plus insurance. It's the initial startup is a couple $1,000s just to get going. So I think that's why you just don't see it as much. There's not a huge amount of demand for kayak guides. I think if I lived in a more developed area, like a larger city, it might be more sustainable for me. But out here where I'm at, it's just not going to happen. There's several questions here about if I'm ever going to hit North Idaho lakes. Yeah, that's definitely on my target list. I was just over in the Selkirks fishing for burbot, and I saw lots of kokanee on the graph, but it was a burbot trip. But it does make me want to go back to that area because I miss it and it's very beautiful. Let's see. Do I think a gimbal mount would fit in my rod holders for a downrigger on a salty. I would not trust those plastic pieces, those plastic tubes. I've broken them just pulling the net out at the wrong angle. So I wouldn't trust a downrigger to it. What resources do I use when I'm researching lakes? This is a really good question, and one that one of my patrons asked. So the primary sources that I use, aside from social media, is I'm going to use state fish and wildlife resources. A lot of times they'll have fishing reports for various lakes, but then I'm also going to look at just bathymetric data. Kokanee tend to hang in the same kinds of places, that is near outlets, shelves, deep basins, or on the edges of the basins, especially where you're going to get any kind of flow. So almost all Kokanee lakes, especially large ones like I was fishing this year, tend to have flow, right? They're dammed and there's water moving through. Anywhere that water is moving through and hits a shelf is going to have upwellings. Where there's upwellings, or where there's pinch points in water flowing, you're going to get eddies. And in those eddies and around those upflow points, you're going to get concentrations of zooplankton. And where there's concentrations of zooplankton, there's going to be kokanee. And it works every time. Like, people can, like, it was funny. Like, I looked at maps of Strawberry before I really researched it. And I was like, I think kokanee will be here and here and here. And when I talk to people, those are exactly the same places that they are catching them. So, it's been true every large kokanee lake I've ever fished. It's for smaller lakes that are just stocked, that don't have big river systems. Kokanee fishing is actually harder because they tend to be more spread out and not concentrated. For me, here where I live, it's mountainous. It's fairly easy because in the mornings, the kokanees chase the shadows of the mountain, right? So in the morning, they're all spread out through the lake. And as the shadow comes across the lake, those fish start to concentrate in the shadow. They're just like little vampires. They hate the sunshine. And so I just follow that shade. And then once they get out of shade, then I start a new search pattern. Let's see. When I'm making my videos, do you orient the rods differently? I do. So normally I'd want a more straight out spread on my rods. The reason that is you get more water covered essentially because you got your rods spread out. You're less likely to get tangles on turns. But I do bend the rods back in a little bit. And the reason I do that is so that you guys can see the rod just go down, or you can see that rod tip and see it smash. So that's the reason I do that. John says that my videos have given him the confidence to try this on his own. You definitely should. I feel like that is the goal of my channel, is to empower you with the knowledge to catch kokanee. They're finicky, fickle fish at times, super frustrating. Even I have days out there I'm just like, what is going on with these fish? Like, banging my head on the wall. I mean, like, you'll just change one thing. You'll speed up, or you just slow down just a tiny bit, or you'll change color, a lure color or bait, and it just turns on. That is such a good feeling figuring that out. Have I thought about doing an ice fishing tour? I have thought about doing an ice fishing tour. Probably not going to happen this winter with everything I've got on my docket, but something to look forward to in the future. So Jonathan asks, what school did I go to? Do I have a graduate degree? Yes. So I graduated from Western State College, now Western State University in Gunnison, Colorado, which is where I caught my first kokanee at Blue Mesa, right there in the Gunnison River, and with a biology degree with an emphasis in ecology. I took a aquatic ecology class there, which I loved. It has been very applicable in everything I do to this day. But most of my focus has been on population biology, and I have a really strong background in statistics, which is what I went into graduate school for, where I went to WSU, and there I studied population biology, dynamics, and ecotoxicology. So I know a lot about toxins in the environment, pesticides, heavy metals, and how it affects animals. Specifically, I worked primarily with endangered prairie plants and butterflies, but It's very applicable to a lot of the stuff I do, and I really am grateful for that education. It's been very useful, not only in my other business, which is that I'm a consultant for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I am also find this to be very applicable in being out in the water and understanding kokanee and other fish and how they behave. Right, it's a very powerful thing to be able to understand animal behavior and understand the mechanisms that underlie that behavior. I think that's what makes me a better fisherman personally. Let's see here. Oh, there was Aaron's asking about the guy that kept cutting me off at Wallowa Lake. Yeah, it happens on occasion. There's some people who just don't like people in kayaks, or I don't know what the deal with that is. I never did directly confront him. I just put my downrigger on. That way, when he passed in front of me and cut me off, I got to capture his gear. So that was really nice of him to let me do that. What YouTubers have inspired me, and do I like or follow? That's a good question. But how this all actually started for me is I was in graduate school and I was working 60 hours a week and just killing myself. And when I got out of grad school, I was like, I need to get back connected with nature. When I was growing up, I would loved birding, hiking, fishing. I had done none of that in grad school. I had just no life. Just totally consumed by grant writing and publications and all the rigors of academic life. And I decided, because I had started my own consulting business, I had some freedom. I wanted to do a project, and when I was young, I was really into birds, and so I did, like they call a big year. There's actually a movie with Jack Black about this, right? So you try and see as many birds as you can in some defined geographic area. So I decided to do a big fishing year in the Pacific Northwest, just Washington and Oregon, and I wanted to see if I could catch as many species of fish as possible from my kayak primarily. And that was a really fun adventure. I think I got something like 87 species of fish, which was pretty spectacular. And I got to see a lot of the Northwest, which I hadn't been here studying for 4 years and hardly seen any of it because I'd just been sitting in a lab or working at my field sites. And so I did that, and that really sort of kicked off everything. And I was inspired by a small channel here in the Northwest called Washington Fish Quest. And he was sort of doing the same thing, but just like capturing one species at a time on video. And he's still one of my favorite YouTubers, just very original content. Kind of, I don't know, it's kind of like country bumpkin type music and feel to it, but it's very unique. It's not like carbon copied, like, Guggen Squad, that type of video, Casey Neistat's content, which has this very similar flow. His is very unique, and so I really enjoyed his content. He's the one that sort of inspired me to start my YouTube channel. So he's still one of my biggest inspirations to this day. James is asking if I'm gonna do Buoy 10. Not this year. I just don't have time to get down there. I do have a window to maybe fish the Strait this year for coho near Squim and Labor Day weekend, but that's still up in the air. Let's see. I'm going to go to some questions here from some of my patrons. Mike Johnson asked about how do I feel about the state of kokanee fishing in the United States? Is it leaning one way or another? Is it going one way or another? Overall, I think that kokanee fishing here is still really good. There's a lot of lakes. I just scratched the surface. Everywhere I went, people were telling me, you should go on this lake. There's bigger kokanee there, right? And these are all lakes I never heard of. So there are clearly many lakes out there that are supporting large kokanee. Very few lakes I felt like were like kokanee in jeopardy. I've certainly seen kokanee collapse at lakes across the West. Like here locally, Palmer Lake, it really struggled. It's still struggling to come back. That was due to overheating and parasites. But I think overall, the biggest threat I've seen to kokanee is overstocking in a lot of lakes or lack of pressure because they're natural production and there's just so many kokanee. There's just not enough food resources in there and it stunts the fish. And when the fish get stunted, there's less interest in catching them because they're small, and then the fishery decline. Interest in the fishery declines. So we see that too with overstocking. I feel like Washington State's one of those states that just puts way too many kokanee into its lakes, and as a result, we get a lot of small kokanee. I think, especially on the west side of the state, we see that a lot. I think they could pull back a little bit on stocking. I'm not saying reduce production. They can move those kokanee to other places and establish new kokanee fisheries. But I really think overstocking is one of the biggest threats. Another thing is it's more challenging is that a lot of these fisheries are just cyclical. So kokanee, even when in stocked lakes and especially in natural spawn lakes, you're going to have these ups and downs, right? Like there's going to be times where there's tons of little fish and there's going to be times where there's fewer fish, but they're larger. And it's a bit like there's some lakes like Flaming Gorge which have a history of consistently producing large fish, but most of the time you're chasing this cycle, right? I mean, look at Berryessa. There was a time that lake was producing large fish. It's not, and then there went through a period again where it was producing large fish. It's not. It just goes up and down. I think a lot of lakes are like that, and that's just kind of how it goes. So, and I think for me, the overall like conservation concern or fishery concern is more access, and that large part of that has to do with there's just the drought and the water gets so low that boat ramps become unusable. Like that was a major issue on a lot of lakes. Even with Flaming Gorge, it was getting drawn down this year. It was getting harder to launch at certain ramps. And at Blue Mesa, some of the ramps were completely out of the water. At Anderson Ranch, many of the ramps were out of the water. And so, for me in a kayak, not as big of an issue, but there's a lot of kokanee powerboat anglers out there. They're the majority. And the biggest threat to me is that losing that access because you just simply can't launch. And what happens is you get down to one or two ramps for these large reservoirs. They get overcrowded. It leads to conflict because there's not enough parking or the boat ramps get backed up and it's a bit of a struggle. So I think that's the thing I'm most concerned about with our fisheries in terms of kokanee fisheries. Let's get back to some of the questions over here on the side. What's the biggest fish I've ever caught? Well, the biggest fish I've ever caught, not kokanee, is sturgeon out of my kayak that was 8 foot long and probably in the 300 to 400 pound class. But the biggest kokanee I ever caught was 23.5 inches, a little over 5 pounds out of Lake Roosevelt. That was 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago. Northwest Open Season asks if I hunt. I do. I'm an archery hunter. I hunt purely for meat. Apple deers. I live in apple country, and there are a million delicious mule deer here that just eat apples all day. So yes, I'm quite fond of eating apple deer. Adam asks does editing my videos help me observe bite patterns or anything else? It does help me go back and reference sort of my thoughts on the day, but also shows me how many times I'm missing bites because I'm distracted and like I'll see a tap that I never detected out there. So I can get a better grasp of what's going on with the fish out there. So Cujo 406 asks if kokanee are filter feeders on zooplankton, why are they attracted to dodgers and prone to bite hoochies and larger blades? This is a very good question that I have no answer for. I think one of the interesting things is I think it's more an excitement response to the dodger. I think they see it as a feeding fish. One thing I've noticed is when I like in the wintertime, I will jig with tiny chironomid flies and through the ice. And I see those kokanee, and once one makes a strike at it, they all get excited, right? Because they do feed on chironomids. They do feed on invertebrates. And so I think it just gets this feeding frenzy. And I think a lot of times especially when I used to run underwater cameras, I would rarely ever get bit if there was just one kokanee. Like if one kokanee came up behind, it would just swim behind there and follow for like minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. They would never bite. And then once another fish showed up, then they'd start doing this, and then you catch one. And so I think it's a sort of feeding frenzy mentality with that. So I noticed that in Japan, this is very interesting. They primarily target schools of kokanee, and they jig with sabiki rigs for kokanee. And they tie a sabiki rig, and then in the middle they'll put small willow leaf blades and jig it up and down through and they catch them that way. So I think that ties right into that behavior. John B asks, what's the situation at Lake Merwin? So Lake Merwin had a die-off this spring, a significant die-off. And what fish are remaining are fairly stunted. The biologists say the die-off was related to turnover. I predict that that's probably going to be a good thing down the line, because there was a lot of smaller fish in Merwin last year. With that die-off, we should see a larger grade of fish emerging from Merwin in the next year or two, depending on what year class those fish were that died. Let's see, snell hooks versus treble hooks. I've tried trebles in the past. They work okay. I still have better luck with just two snelled of the drop shot hooks. The reason I don't like the treble hooks most of all is that they tend to get snagged in the nets, even the rubber nets, and they get torn up in the nets, and I just ended up abandoning them. It was just taking too long to get fish out of the nets. Peter asks, one of your videos you mentioned my dad didn't push me into fishing and let me fall in love with it. Advice for getting kids into fishing. I think one of the main things that kids have a short attention span. That's always been true. Maybe it's even more true nowadays. So target those, if you're going to get them into kokanee specifically, if you really want to get them into kokanee, target those lakes with high densities, even if they're smaller fish, keep them busy, right? So there's a ton of lakes like that in every state that, you can go out. Most of the fish are going to be small, but it's way more fun to have consistent action than to get them out and dragging for, hours on end with one bite here and there for the big fish. Let them fall in love with catching, and then they should fall in love with fishing, would be my advice. Is kokanee or walleye better eating? That's fighting words. I don't know. I would have to say I prefer kokanee over walleye. Barely. It depends on what I'm in the mood for, though. If you want fish and chips, walleye is so much better. So they ask, why not fish Montana? So I wanted to fish Montana this year, just couldn't squeeze it in. I've fished several lakes up around Kalispell, but I just didn't have time to get over there. Western Montana is one of my favorite places, but just in terms of budgeting and time, I just couldn't make it do it. Okay, so I think that's it. I've got to everybody's questions. It's been about an hour, so it's probably time to wrap it up. But I do want to say, again, I appreciate everybody's support. Thanks for sharing my content, liking everything, and just generally being there for me through my ups and downs in my life. I know that I've documented a lot on that on my channel as I've struggled with health issues in my family. You guys have been super awesome, and it's always been something that brightens my day when I get home or I'm having a crummy day, just dealing with the world and life. It's been awesome. So thank you again so much, and hopefully we'll see kokanee across Canada, or maybe I'll just call it Kokanee next year when I get up to BC in the heartland of kokanee country. All right, guys, if you have any more questions, you can always just put them in the comment section, and I will get to them in this video or any other video. And I'll see you out on the water. And just remember, fish smarter, not harder. Bye, guys.